Hello everyone, my name is Janar and I'm with my colleagues Ainur, Camila and Dumonhan going to present you our presentation number 3. We'll start with discussion of fieldwork, after look at data collection, then documentation, and finish with Humanis1's article. So let's start with the fieldwork for language description. There are two aspects. First is a fieldwork experience, which is primary our data collection. The second is a process of discovery and analysis, which summarizes and makes a description of our research. The goal of language description is to look and describe the prevalent patterns for speakers community, and the main product is the data from a variety of speakers and noting some common variations. If we look at speakers, we should choose a high variation of many speakers with different social and economic contexts. There are different speakers who could be fluent in language practice or speak slowly. Some speakers bring their own analysis. Some could not be willing to help with translation. And in general, the desirable choice of speaker is defined by his reliability, having necessary time, and possibility for regular session. If you look at preparation to a field work, we should always have a background knowledge of the language we are going to study, know its cultural specification, and look at existing works. The researcher should be familiar with properties of the language, such as phonetics, phonology, lexical and grammatical categories, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. Some researchers practice the sketch grammar, where you make intervals during the trip, and understand which information gathered, which you need to discover. In some language, which do not have written information, it's good to find the previous audio. Also, it's good to have all equipment and other necessary stuff. Data collection for phonetic and phonological description. It's most important is having a linguistic session with a native speaker, where the speaker with researcher sit and disturb the space. And there are specific requirements. The speakers should contain different age categories. For instance, older speaks more conservative pronunciation. And also, it's better have data from different genders. Some data collection starts with listening work list, where worker gets accustomed to language, and it could be by support such as kinship terms. This could be use of picture or bulletin items, and the main advantage is an increase of speakers' confidence. In the starting stages, it's used a narrow IPA transcription. If there is a common error, where there is a repetition of the same word by a speaker and he gets tired, and as a result he pronounces word unnaturally, and it could be solved by recording another speaker or asking for corrections or developing terminology of articulation. Experienced field workers use a phonemic transcription, but this could be a dialectical variation that hide important distinction, and to keep it consistent, researchers should avoid too many non-tongue characters. If we look at data collection, there are two methods. Data collection grammatical description, there are two methods. It's a questionnaire-driven elicitation and a text-driven elicitation method. The questionnaire-driven elicitation is choosing some data using of questions. Speaker is not familiar with linguistic terminology, so the worker uses task, for instance, to find a match or describe the color, or using non-linguistic stimulus as photographs, videos, and pictures. And also there is a linguistic stimulus, which is used by asking to construct a sentence in the target language or add an adverb. The advantage of this method is that it's quick, efficient, and eliciting and have comprehensive coverage of linguistic fact. However, there are limitations as pragmatic background, speaker perspectivism, linguistic stimuli terms, researcher focus, group dynamics, pressure, fatigues, and affective influence. The text-driven elicitation examines a simple feature of language or develop a comprehensive grammar. It's supplemented by questionnaire-based elicitation, and it's providing by stimuli as asking to read book or read a story, and as you collect text, you create annotated corpus. First, you report a narrative. After get summary, transcribes the narrative, use word-to-word translation, and create a morpheme clause. The advantage is that it's not limited to people who Fieldworker ask for, but there are three limitations as that more time needed, not using grammatical structure, and information come at separate times, which makes a little bit less. Data collection for semantic and pragmatic description is used to reset the meaning of contraction. The RASRI test is a truth-value judgment test, where the subject is shown a situation, for instance, through video, and then he judges is it true or false. The picture identification task is used by asking to pick a sentence that best describes the picture. And accessibility test consists of proposition with or without some queuing item, and researchers focus on intonation or upgrade. Managing data is an important part, which includes note-taking, metadata collection, and documentation. And linguistics uses a laptop or notebook, and metadata includes a selection of following types of information. It's unique identifier, language identifier, date of creation, and so on. And result of this work is create documentation that will be universally shared, funded, and accessed. So let's move on to more detailed discussion of data collection, and we looked at Wiki articles.
Hello everyone, delivering thanks to the previous speaker. Today, I'd like to also discuss the article by LING473. It is called Data Collection Methods for Field-Based Language Documentation. So what LING473 in this article argues, the main point of his argument is that there is a need for a more reflexive and flexible approach, and that the paper by LING473 mainly demonstrates a more flexible approach to data collection methods overall. His main point is in that the variety of methods should gain awareness in an academic field, so it helps for a proper language documentation, and it might be really important and vital for a more deep investigation of data collection methods. So LING473 in his article provides examples of previous scholars which were also talking about the language documentation. For example, one of the most important arguments and examples he was relying to was Labov's principles, Labov's 4 mostly cited principles from 1975. So the first one is the consensus principle, and in short, it is judgments of one speaker can be characteristic of all speakers. So this is what the consensus principle is all about. Second principle LING473 explains, relying to Labov, is that it is called experimental principle. Experimental principle, it's in the case of a disagreement of speakers, and judgments of those familiar with theoretical issues should not be counted as evidence. So this is what experimental principle provided by Labov is all about. And the third principle, it's called clear case principle. Clear case principle is when disputed judgments have to include one consistent pattern. Investigation needed for dialects. So for instance, when someone is investigating and documenting data on dialects, so that the investigator should find a consistent pattern that can be seen throughout the speech of the speakers. When we go to the last principle provided by Labov, it is principle of validity. It is when the use of language is shown to be more consistent than interperspective judgments. So let me repeat this again. So when the use of language is shown to be more consistent than introspective judgments, it's called principle of validity. So As we can see, the lab of four principles were first established in 1975. So Luke decided that at a modern period, there should be other principles added, and he improved this list of principles regarding the language documentation, and he added some interesting ones. So, for instance, as the continuation and as a fifth principle, he named it a principle of explicitness, and here he claims that the reason for choosing a particular data collection tool should be justified and documented. So it's not that when you want to document, when you want to investigate a particular language, you just choose mm, whatever method you like, but you should also explain that a data collection tool in your paper and justify the choice. Uh, and another principle developed by Lucia was the principle of transparency. It is when we know that there are different works on different languages, and often there are different abbreviations and other labels are used in the work, in the papers. So the principle of transparency actually means that those abbreviations and labels should be explained in the metadata. Another principle developed by Lübke is the principle of salience. Like it is, as its name suggests, the most salient method should be chosen for the analysis of a particular research question. So it also should be justified. As for the eighth principle, it is called triangulation method. As we know from triangulation, so the data collection methods should be justified and verified through triangulation. So there can be different ways to triangulate, or there can be different methods that a scholar can verify through triangulation his choice. So for instance, there can be different data collections used for the collection of evidence, and another triangulation point can be data from more than one consultant or consultants can be gathered, and for example, as the completion of the triangulation, there can be comparison of data on on that particular topic. So yes, so according to Luca, this principle uh, can serve as a good litmus paper or as a verification of the data collection. Last but not least, uh, there's also a principle of longevity. So, as its name suggests, so more data valid beyond the scope of a particular research. So, when I speak about this again, so the scholar should not limit um, when he is collecting or when she is collecting data on a specific topic or regarding the language documentation. The scholar should not limit and try to gather more valid data beyond the scope of a particular research. This is those are mentioned the most important points which were explained in the article of Luca. Of course, there are many other points, but this can be considered as the most vital and the points that should be stopped on and explained. Uh, I can also add that from all those principles, we can come to the types of communicative events resulting from different methods of data collection. So as we've explained that in the principle 5, that the data collection and the data collection tool should be explained in the metadata, we come to another important point described by Luke in his article, and it's about documentary corpus. So there are usually 3 types of documentary corpus which are interconnected with one another. So let me briefly stop on them and explain them as well. So first documentary corpus is observed communicative events, or as we can call it OCE. As the name suggests, it's when we have conversation and we have narratives in our documentary corpus. And the next documentary corpus is staged communicative events. So when we describe pictures and videos, stimuli, matching games. So this is a little bit different, as you can see from the observation communicative events. And the last but not least, elicitation. It's when we have paradigm judgments and test results as types of communicative events during the process of the data collection. This is all that I wanted to tell you about an article by Luque. Now I give floor to the next speaker, Camila. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Camila. I will continue with Himmelmann's reading about language documentation. His definition for language documentation is a lasting, multi-purpose record of a language. So the main features of an ideal language documentation would be to cover all registers and varieties of language, to include both specimens of spoken and written language, to serve a large variety of different uses, apart from linguistic research, for example, educational purposes. And users of such multi-purpose documentation would be not only the linguists, but the speech community itself, national, international agencies concerned with education, for example, and researchers in other fields, anthropologists, ethnographers, and so on. Long-term perspective, which goes beyond current issues and concerns. So when you do a language documentation, you do it not only for one-time project, but for a record which will last for generations. Often it is the case that the practical result of field research is influenced by factors that are specific to the given setting. So the native speakers also can turn the way in which your project goes. So you should provide room for active participation as much as possible, because it is considerably more productive. Not everything in the documentation is determined, though. Because speakers usually do not have a fully worked out plan for what to document, and it is decided interactively. What rests on researchers is forming a theoretically grounded set of basic goals and targets, because language documentation is not a theory-free or anti-theoretical enterprise. Some concerns that are theoretical are the methods used in recording, processing, and preserving linguistic primary data, and data graveyards. What are data graveyards? It's large heaps of data which do not serve applicational or theoretical purposes. So they do not meet this goal. Why do we engage in language documentation? There are 3 reasons. First is language endangerment. An archive can serve as a data repository for scientific inquiries and as a support for language maintenance. The second reason is research economy. So step by step, in an additive fashion, we combine and integrate different projects' primary data sets to produce a comprehensive documentation. So many comprehensive documentations can grow and strengthen the empirical basis of all disciplines working on this language or culture. Third reason is accountability. As we talked in the first weeks of our course, replicability and falsifiability of analysis are crucial for empirical studies. Himmelmann presents the basic format of language documentation. One component of this format is primary data. Primary data is specimens of observable linguistic behavior, so narratives and conversations between real people in real life. It is impossible to record all communicative events happening, but it is what we strive for, because there are some obstacles, practical, ethical, such as you cannot put microphones and cameras everywhere. The second type of primary data is metalinguistic knowledge, which is acquired through native speakers, mainly through elicitation. For example, when a monolingual native speaker provides definitions for words. So it is important to remember that both metalinguistic knowledge and observable linguistic behavior are records of communicative events. The other component of the basic format is apparatus. Apparatus is all the information which accompanies the primary data. There is no precise extent or format. It is debated, but there is need for metadata. You are familiar with it. So metadata needed per session and for the documentation as a whole. There are two standards: Open Language Archives Community and IL Metadata Initiative for standard for metadata. And all the other information which is not metadata exactly goes into the section called annotations. Annotations are done for the sessions, and annotations for the documentation as a whole is called general access resources. In annotations, minimally you should have transcription and translation. In general access resources, you can include ethnographical sketches, sketch grammars, glossing conventions, and other information on this language. So what's new about this basic format of language documentation? As we said, it is focused on primary data, accountability, long-term preservation, but also diversity of contexts, languages, subject matters, interdisciplinary teams who are experts in different fields, close cooperation between native speakers and researchers. There are limitations for this format. For example, ethical problems such as changing the social structure of the society, because society's member participated in your research and has changed, their social status has changed, for example. So alternative for this format is grammar dictionary. It has major problems according to Immelman because it targets language as an abstract system of rules, and communicative practices are undocumented, unreconstructible, abstractions are not verifiable or replicable. So in general, it is not good enough as a lasting record of a language. So the solution they come up with is an extended format for language documentation. It is the basic format for language documentation, but with new added section of descriptive analysis. So if before we had a sketch grammar in general access resources, now we have a comprehensive full descriptive grammar and maybe a dictionary even. But Himmelman concludes with the thought that such format is also not feasible because most good descriptive grammars are based on a corpus. And if there is information already available in the corpus that is sufficient to write up a grammar and extract this information, then it is just a waste of resources which could be better spent on enlarging the corpus of primary data instead of writing a grammar. So, but he concludes also with the statement that most language documentations in recent years are actually hybrids of extended and basic formats of language documentation. So this is the end of our presentation. Thank you very much.